This is kind of a hard one because of our natural desire to dominate and control. But in 1 Peter 5, 2 and 3, Peter is talking to the elders of the church, like the pastors of different churches, and basically saying, um, don't use control, domination, force, manipulation, intimidation, anything like that in your leadership. Um, so I'll start in verse 2. Be compassionate shepherds who tenderly care for God's flock and who feed them well, for you have the responsibility to guide, protect, and oversee. Consider it a joyous pleasure and not merely a religious duty. Lead from the heart under God's leadership. And then because okay. Lead from the heart under God's leadership, not as a way to gain finances dishonestly, but as a way to eagerly and cheerfully serve. Don't be controlling tyrants, but lead others by your beautiful examples to the flock. And I actually, rather than applying this to church leaders right now, I want to apply it to parents, because I think that's a struggle that we have with how do we guide kids to know God and to learn about Him without forcing them. And I often hear about and see and hear the struggles of parents where they're saying like, how do I how do I navigate this? How do I introduce my kids to God when they're pushing back and they don't want to be involved? Do I force them anyway? And I think we tend to do that. We tend to force kids to participate, hoping that in the end it will just from being involved and hearing it, they'll learn, and in the end they will desire themselves to follow God. And I have seen this backfire so many times. And I'm thankful personally that it's always been, I would say, my own faith from the very beginning. I was never forced to participate or to believe. And so I think just like God is not controlling, as we're representing God, whether it's in leadership positions within the church, outside the church, or as parents to our kids, I think it's important for us to reflect who God is in that way and not be controlling. And so in 1 Peter 5:3, don't be controlling tyrants, but lead others by your beautiful examples to the flock. So I think I'm just throwing this out there that so I mean, this idea of shepherds, right? Sheep are led. You can't really drive sheep. I I went on this hike once in Sweden, and in Sweden you're allowed to hike onto other people's land. It's just part of the thing there. So there's hiking trails that go onto different people's lands, and there's actually these like steps to get over people's fences and stuff. It's quite cool. But on one of these hikes, there was a flock of sheep on the other side of this fence, and they all came over to the fence when we approached it. And I was actually nervous to go to the other side because of all these sheep there. I was like, I don't know what they're gonna do. But so we went on to the other side, and it was so interesting because the sheep actually like split. They were in this group. They split so that we could walk through them. And then we kept walking on the path, and they all got in a line on the path and were following us. And then when we turned around to look at them, they all stopped. But I just thought that was so interesting. But so anyway, but like sheep from that experience, anyway, sheep are led. They're not really driven places as far as I can tell. I could be wrong about that. But and so I think probably a better approach than trying to drive people to God, especially kids within family. I think this is probably even where it applies more than leadership within the church. but to provide opportunity and invitation to know God and experience Him and participate, but not to force anything. And I think, I mean, it really has to start with us, right? If we have a real relationship with God and are expressing that, and having experiences with Him and leading kids into experience with Him and facilitating them hearing His voice and seeing Him and all these things, I think that's a better approach than if they're not wanting to participate, allowing them not to participate, because that's how God is with us. Like, He doesn't force us into anything. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't choose Him, and He still doesn't force us. But then those who do choose Him, it's out of a love for Him and a desire for Him and those things. It's not out of compulsion. So I'm thinking, when I read this about 1 Peter, in 1 Peter 5, how not to be, to the leaders, not to be tyrants, but to lead by example, and the responsibility being to guide, protect, and oversee, and having it be a pleasure, not a religious duty, and lead from the heart under God's leadership as a way to eagerly and cheerfully serve. It made me think of this dilemma that parents have with, how do I get my kids to experience and love God when they don't want to? And my thought, which I'm not a parent, so I don't really know, and I would love to hear feedback from parents especially, on what has worked and what hasn't worked. My thought is that it's better not to force them when they're not wanting to participate, but just have the opportunity there and the invitation there, and your own life being an example of the joy that it is to follow God and to be connected with Him and hearing His voice and all of these things. And it actually reminds me, I volunteered at a camp for foster kids for several years. It's called Royal Family Kids Camp. It's a great program. And that's one of the rules that they have, basically, is that the kids are not forced to participate in any of the religious stuff that we're doing. So if they don't want to, then they can just sit outside the room that we're doing stuff in. I mean, they're not allowed to go play, but the leader, whoever their counselor is, would just go sit outside with them. And in all the years that I did that, there was one gal who actually did that. And it happened to be my kid that I was a counselor for. And so I went out there the very first day. She's like, I don't want to do this. And so I was like, okay, cool. Let's go sit outside then. And so we just sat outside for a while. It was probably about 3/4 of the meeting. And I think from her realizing that she had a choice, that she didn't have to participate, she ended up choosing to participate, that she wanted to go and sit with the others. And for the rest of the week, she wanted to be there. And then also for the rest of the years that she came to camp, she wanted to be there in the group. But that first day, she was really testing to see if it was a forced thing. And I think had it been a forced thing, she would have been just really closed off the whole time. But because it wasn't, and it was her choice to be in there, it made it so that she enjoyed it and could receive. So I think there's something to that. Yeah, throwing that out there.